Alright, so this is kind of different. I'm going to see if I can just do this in one shot. Uh, I know you didn't like my scripted video from earlier this year, but this is how it's going to be. Alright, so you'll hopefully you understand. Okay, so a little preamble, I guess. I got this random email back on the 20th of January. Today's February 1st. So that's actually not too bad. Yeah, only 10 days, 11 days, something like that. Okay, we're getting better. Okay, so here it is. So, dear Carlin, my name is Tamis, and I have no idea how to say his last name. Sorry, from Hungary. I work for the Aero magazine, Aviation Monthly, for 20 years, plus I write my own blog, The Airbase, for 10 years. I'm turning to you with the following request. I've read your Desert Storm diary, so thank you for that. Somebody actually read the book. Yay! It inspired me to write an article about your story, your daily life as a helicopter mechanic on the USNS Kilauea during Desert Storm. Most articles focus on life in fighting units, so it would be interesting to write about the life of a helicopter unit of a support ship during the wartime. The Hungarian written article would be published in Aero magazine and 30 days later on my blog as well, on his blog. So if you think we can make an interview via email, please be so kind as to let me know. Thank you. Best regards, Tamis from Hungary. I'm like, how does that even happen? I was like, you just don't think about somebody from far away reading your book, But that's the cool thing about the internet. Yeah, Ha, cool. Anyway, so he included a link, and I'll try to remember to put that on the description. Okay, so then it was about 5 or 6 emails back and forth. So he sends me his list of questions finally. Okay, so then about that same time is when I decided to quit my job, and then things got kind of turned upside down, and I was doing stuff out here, and I'm like, you know what, I need to get this thing going and get it answered. So I finally I wrote a lot of it a few days ago, and then I took a few days off, and I went back and I reread what I wrote, which is always a good idea. Edited it a little bit, changed a little bit, moved some stuff around. Okay. So, with all that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what I wrote to him, because he'll probably have to edit it for the magazine, but I'm going to include that on my blog, which I have not looked at for a long time. Okay. So I'm going to have a link to that in the video description, and then also I'll post a link of this video or embed it into my blog. Okay, so that's where that'll be. Anyway, my answer back to him was, hey, sorry it's taken so long. I've had fun thinking about the answers. Feel free to add it as needed, and let me know if you want to make any changes. I left a few links at the end of the attachment. Thanks again, and best wishes. Okay, and then I sent him the attached interview, which is what's coming up next. And yeah, this is maybe 6 pages long, something like that. I don't know. Can I do a word count on here? Tools. Word count. Hey, look at that. 185 lines, about 4,700 words ish. Okay, so just sit back and relax. I won't do voices, I promise. Okay, first question. Why did you choose aviation technician profession, and why in the Navy? My answer. I've always been fascinated with airplanes. Sometimes my parents would take us to the airport just to watch airplanes take off and land. And of course, going to air shows where you could walk the flight line and look at all the airplanes. In high school, I was more interested in the Air Force at the time because of the fighter jets. One day, the Navy recruiter gave me a call at home. I guess one of my friends in school had given him my name as a lead. So after school, I went down to see what was available. That's when I was reminded that that's when I was reminded that the Navy had aircraft carriers, something I had known about from watching the old World War II movies, and that they had jets and helicopters that went out on ships. An uncle of mine happened to be visiting, and he said the advantage of being in the Navy was you did the same basic job, but would be traveling all over the world at the same time. Also, the Navy brings your base with you. You have your bed, a hot water shower, real food, not MREs. The Air Force just stays at their own base, while our ship would get to visit interesting places. That sounded perfect to me. So about Christmas time of my last year in high school, I signed up. They had a delayed entry program. So I signed the contract and did some of the paperwork while still in school. And then about 2 weeks after I graduated high school, at age 18, I was in Navy boot camp in San Diego, California. Question 2. When did you join the Navy and how did you become an aviation technician? I joined the Navy in June of 1985, right after I graduated high school. I had just turned 18. After boot camp, or basic training as it's officially called, I went to my tech school, or A school, where I learned how to be an aviation structural mechanic, structures, or AMS. There's also an AMH rating that works on the hydraulic systems. The AMS deals with the actual structural part of the aircraft, such as wheels and tires, wings, fuselage, and the flight controls. At the squadron, the AMS and AMH work together, and finally, in recent years, the Navy has finally combined the AMS and AMH rating into the AM rating. Most of the work at the squadron level is dealing with hydraulic systems anyway. In my AMS A school, I learned how to do metal fabrication and repairs. So how to do riveting, cutting, parts layouts to create replacement ribs and patches to fix damage. In reality, that kind of work was very seldom done, especially at our work level. We would often replace a part with a new one, and then the part would be rebuilt at a rework facility, for example. On the ship, we did more repairs because some parts were not available. One time, a forklift ran into the helicopter while it was parked, so I got to rebuild a small section that had some damage. Coming out of A school, you had some basic skills but no experience, so you would work as an apprentice with a more experienced mechanic. Question 3. Where did you serve before Helicopter Squadron HC-5? Okay, so I just kind of did a list here. Boot Camp, San Diego, California. A School, Millington, Tennessee, near Memphis. Then there was a FRAMP, and I broke that down somewhere. Okay, yeah, here it is. I was like, I tried to get my acronyms together, but this one was down a couple lines. I can't remember exactly what FRAMP stands for. Fleet Replacement Aviation Maintenance Program, maybe? It was a specialized training program all about the specific aircraft you would be working on. So I have a few FRAMPs. So I did FRAMP at Lemoore, California for the A-7E attack jets. Then I went VX-5, a test and evaluation squadron at Naval Weapons Test Center, China Lake, California in the Mojave Desert, where I was a plane captain for A-7E jets. Plane captain sounds like a really big job, but it's mostly an entry-level position. We would fuel and inspect the aircraft between flights and assist the pilot with pre-flight and startup, and then recovery after the flight. Probably the most fun job I had in the Navy, though. Then I went to HC-3 FRAMP again at Naval Air Station, North Island, California, at San Diego for H-46 helicopter FRAMP, which again was Fleet Replacement Aviation Maintenance Program, maybe. From North Island, then I went to HC-5 at NAS Agana, Guam, the Naval Air Station there. Okay. Question 4. Hey, we're doing good. HC-5 was deployed always on USNS Kilauea. Question. Was it permanent squadron of this part or of this ship? Okay. He's obviously read the book, so he's asking, was my detachment, or did the Kilauea always have my detachment, and so on. Okay, so HC-5 supplied helicopter detachments to different ships, and so you had HC-5 was the squadron. It was approximately 12 aircraft and 300 people, and then from that we would take 2 helicopters and send them on a detachment to a ship as needed, and they would assemble a crew to go with the helicopters, is basically the way I should have read that. Okay, so HC-5 supplied helicopter detachments to different ships. There was also HC-11 from NAS North Island that also supplied helicopter detachments with their H-46s. NAS stands for Naval Air Station. So Naval Air Station North Island, which is on Coronado Island at San Diego. At one time, I was deployed on the USS Niagara Falls, which I believe was AFS 3. So we had Detachment 3, or we just called it the Det 3. And then later on, I was on Det 4, which was for the Kilauea. The various detachments, or dets, would usually go to the same ship, but not necessarily the same crews because of crew rotations. The detachment was still part of its main squadron based at NAS Agana, Guam. The ship may deploy without the helicopter detachment and then pick up the helicopter detachment as needed. We would be picked and assigned to a detachment as needed. When not part of a detachment, we were then part of the main squadron. Okay. Question 5. What part of the... Okay, try that again. What was the proportion of time you spent shore-based and shipboard? That's a really good Navy question. Proportion of sea time and shore time is about 50-50, maybe not exactly, and that can change, quote unquote, depending on the needs of the Navy, as they say. With that said, I had spent about the first 3 years of my career as shore duty, first boot camp, and then A school, then FRAMP, and then VX5, and then another FRAMP for H-46s before I got to Guam. My whole 3 years at Guam was considered sea duty, but from that I was only actually on a ship for a little over 1 year and 4 months. The Navy keeps count of your actual at-sea time. There is a bonus pay for being at sea, and it may also be used at computing some advancements and other things like that. So it's about half of the time for sea time and half for shore time, but sea time usually isn't always out at sea. At least that was my experience. Different job ratings can have different sea-shore rotation schedules too, depending on if there are shore-based jobs available. Okay, question 6. How can you compare life on a support ship to life at a shore base? Okay. Life on a ship is pretty intense. Everything has to fit on a ship that is about 500 feet long in the case of the support ships. Obviously, aircraft carriers are much bigger, but they have more people too. You eat on the ship, you sleep on the ship, you work on the ship, and you don't get off the ship very often. In most of my time on the ship, my whole world was only about 100 feet long, but it also was spread out over several levels of the ship. So lots of going up and down the ladders, or stairs. I think it was one deck up from where I slept to the flight deck, and then another deck up to our office space, and at least one or maybe 2 decks up to the mess deck where we ate. So if I wanted a cup of coffee, it was up a few flights of ladders or stairs to refill my cup. On shore base, I had been married for a while, so I lived in a house on base, which was supplied by the Navy. I got divorced before Desert Storm deployment, so I had to move into the barracks, and then I would eat at the chow hall. On base, there are stores, movie theaters, usually some kind of recreational stuff, a gym, and some bases even had golf courses and trails to ride your bicycle on, and so on. One of the deployments, I took a bicycle along and found a place to store it on the ship, and then when we pulled into port, I would take it out for rides, just a chance to get away from the ship and go exploring. I guess the biggest difference is on the ship, everything is in one place. Everyone you work with is always there. You eat with your crew, you work with your crew, and your roommate is on your crew. It's hard to find any place where you can just be alone on the ship. Sometimes I'd go out on the flight deck when we weren't flying after our work was done and everyone else had gone to bed, just to sit still and have some time to myself. That's hard to do on a ship. Cold coffee. Number 7. How can you compare the shipboard life on a deployed support ship to life on a warship? I'd only spent a few weeks on Navy aircraft carriers. We would go out for a week at a time so the jet pilots could get requalified. The ships are all similar, only the size is different, I guess. The warships have obviously more weapons, like missile launchers or mounted guns, for example. The support ships, like the supply ships I was on, were typically not armed. The Niagara Falls had a single 3-inch gun mounted, if I remember correctly, and the Kilauea didn't even have that. Although both of those could have 50 caliber machine guns mounted as needed, like as defense against small boats. The Kilauea had a civilian crew. It belonged to the Military Sea Lift Command. Only the air det, the helicopters, and the communications det detachment were Navy personnel. The Kilauea had been converted from a Navy ship and was part of the conversion. Try that again. The Kilauea was converted from a Navy ship, and part of the conversion they replaced the normal berthing areas with 2-man staterooms, so we had nicer beds and a bit more room. Regular Navy ships have racks or beds that are stacked 3 high, so you have no personal space at all. All Navy ships go through the drills though, ranging from man overboard and abandoned ship to various damage control and firefighting drills, and also security drills. Things happen on a ship that you wouldn't expect. The Kilauea managed to run over a reef, which caused some damage to the screw or the propeller and also the rudder. Another ship near us hit a floating mine that was left over from the Iran-Iraq war. The Kilauea also had one of the boilers explode, which made a big bang and lots of smoke. Also scared the crap out of us. Number 8. How did you get the news Iraq occupied Kuwait? Was it immediately clear your ship would be deployed to Operation Desert Shield? And that's a good point. It was Desert Shield before it was Desert Storm. In fact, we were deployed before they even called it Desert Shield. So everybody thinks Desert Storm, but a lot of people forget about Desert Shield. It became Desert Storm when the first guns were fired. Our detachment had just gotten back from a regularly scheduled deployment with the Kilauea. We'd only been home on Guam for a few days, if I remember correctly, when we heard about Iraq invading Kuwait. I think it was on the news that evening, and then the next day, the squadron, we had quarters, an assembly of the whole squadron, and they announced we would be deploying several detachments. All of us knew right away we were going right back out. Since our det had just gotten back, we took the same crew, same pilots, same aircraft, and all the same gear with only a couple exceptions. Since we had just gotten back, we were able to assemble everyone and all the gear much quicker than normal, so we were actually the first detachment to be deployed. The Kilauea had returned to its port in the Philippines after dropping us on Guam, so they made the trip back to get us, and also another pair of helos for another detachment, and that ship was also in the Philippines. Once back at the PI, the Philippines, we did a huge load up of cargo and were on the way to the Gulf area at best possible speed. Question 9. Yep, we're doing good. How did you prepare? We're not doing good. Question 9. How did you prepare for wartime deployment? Most of the preparations were already done because we had just gotten back. This is a quick overview of what was involved though. We assembled the team, pilots, officers, and enlisted crew. There have a few, that's a typo, sorry dude, officers and enlisted crew. There are a few from each work center. So in my case, there were several AMS or AMHs, the hydraulics guys. There were some engine mechanics, ADs. There was an electronics technician, AT, a couple aviation electricians, AEs, and so on. So every work center there was 1 or 2 people, or in our case, a couple extras. We were assigned 2 helicopters, which were inspected, and we go through a formal acceptance process. If we don't believe the helicopter is in good repair, we could ask for a different one. You always try to take your best helicopters on detachment because you have limited resources available. We will require tools and support equipment. For example, we have aircraft jacks and stands. At the squadron, there would be the gear we would need already available, but for deployment, we have a whole standard list of every piece of equipment we would need. On a personal level, you would go buy extra uniforms, more socks and underwear before you leave, as that might be harder to replace as needed on the ship. We'd go through the extra training. For one example, we were issued gas masks and chemical protection suits. We were not expected to be involved in actual combat, so there wasn't anything like firearms training. Number 10. Was there a big difference between peacetime and wartime deployments? I actually remember thinking about this on the Desert Storm deployment, because I had already been deployed on the same ship with the same crew just prior to this deployment. Our day-to-day life was very similar, just the hours were longer. In peacetime, everything is simulated training. One example was the pilots had to learn to fly cargo between ships. Kilauea was a munition ship. Most of our cargo was bombs. So for practice, they had some metal pallets loaded with inert practice 500-pound bombs. These were exact duplicates for the real bombs, could even be dropped for practice by the aircraft, same weight, just no explosives. So they had 6 of these 500-pound bombs in a pallet for a total weight of 3,000 pounds, which was our typical load for the helicopters. For hours, day and night, the helicopter would fly over the ship, hover over the flight deck. The load would be hooked to the cargo hook. The helicopter would fly away from the ship, do a circle, and then come back, set the load on the deck, release the hook, and fly away. Then the other helo would come in, pick up the load, repeat the cycle. For Desert Storm, when we sent a pallet of bombs away, we didn't see it coming back. Otherwise, it was very much the same. We trained the way we fight. Question 11. How can you describe your typical day at sea? The typical day at sea for me wasn't very typical, I suppose. We work in 2 shifts. My typical shift was from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. We were on a 12 on, 12 off schedule. Although that was flexible, we might overlap the other shift both at the beginning and the end of our shift. My job was maintenance on the helicopters, so we couldn't do much when they were actually flying. Our other task was hooking loads to the helicopters. We would stand next to the load, holding up the pennant, basically a large piece of plastic pipe with a cargo strap through the pipe. The strap had a loop on its end, and the helicopter would approach the ship and then line up with you. When they were in position, your job was to slide the loop onto the cargo hook on the helicopter. As soon as you had it hooked, you'd run out of the way, and the helicopter would lift up until the load was clear of the deck, and then fly towards the destination ship. We would do that sometimes from beginning of shift to the end, sun up to sundown, etc. We would take turns doing the hookups. There was also a safety observer, a flight deck LSE or landing signal enlisted person, giving directions to the helo crew, and if they wanted to land, we would have 2 people assigned to attach chains and chocks to the wheels once they had landed. Once on deck, they would get fuel and then continue the mission. In between all that, you would get a few good meals, all the coffee you could drink, and a few hours sleep after your shift was over. Once the flight was over, we'd rinse the helos with a garden hose with fresh water to remove as much of the salt as possible. And then the helicopter had an automatic blade folding system which could reduce the blade area to within the size of the fuselage. We would then manually push the helo into its bay and make the deck ready for the second one to land. rinse it, fold the blades, and also push it in. That's when we really got busy. On average, there was about 20 maintenance man-hours per flight hour per helicopter. That would include normal inspections between flight, fixing anything that wasn't right, hydraulic leaks, corrosion removal from the constant exposure to the salt spray, replacing tires, rebuilding the shock struts, which took a lot of abuse from landing on a moving and pitching flight deck. Nearly every minute the helo was on the ship, someone was making repairs or inspecting, and then they were rolled out for the next mission. Number 12. How can you describe a day when you were sent to Shorebased to transfer cargo to the ship? Our ship and detachment were involved what we called an airhead. I'm not sure if that's even the official term or where it came from. The ship would anchor as close to the shore as possible to a small shore airfield. The Air Force cargo planes would land at the airfield and then deliver cargo to us. The cargo planes had a large pallet that were then broken down and restacked into smaller pallets, all sorted by what ship the cargo would be delivered to. We would deliver to other ships. Those pallets were then weighed, and we'd set the pallets into groups by weight to make the loads as close to 3,000 pounds as possible, which was the max load that helos could fly. The helos would then fly trips between the shore and the ship from sunrise to sundown typically. We had flight rules that we could only fly in daylight hours at that airfield. Let's make a new clip. Part 2. Okay. Question 13. I'm sure operational tempo was intensive. What was the biggest challenge to make sure helos would be mission capable? H-46 were more problematic in salt air environments than on the shore. Okay, answer. I think the biggest issue was time and available manpower. The helos were flying up to 8 to 10 hours per day each, and we were always struggling to have enough time between flights to get the work done on time. Some maintenance could be put off until we had more time. Other things like a hydraulic leak had to be fixed before it could fly again. So there was a lot of time management happening. What can we do now, or what can wait until the next day? The helos have constant vibration, which causes all kinds of failures, wire bundles chafing against the airframe, parts just work loose. Everything is cotter pinned, safety wired, wires are loomed, hydraulic lines are clamped into position. On top of that, metal choices are compromised. It seems that the lightest, strongest aluminum alloys which were available in the 1970s, used on helicopters, are also the most likely to corrode when exposed to saltwater spray. The helos spend their entire life at sea down close to the water, so they are constantly kicking up spray. The spray gets inside compartments, which causes everything to corrode. Wire connectors will fail, hardware like screws and bolts will rust. It's basically bad for everything. It's a constant battle. Rinse the aircraft when they come back from flight, then drain the bilge areas to let the water out that you just put in by rinsing everything. We'd use rags and sponges to pull water out of the smaller spaces. We even brought a personal shop vac, wet-dry vacuum, with us to help get the water out. Then anti-corrosion sprays were applied to help keep the salt spray off. The exposed parts of the landing gear struts were wiped down with clean rags and hydraulic fluid. Part of my job was aircraft painter and corrosion control. So every 28 days, I'd inspect the entire aircraft 1 inch at a time and look for signs of corrosion under the paint. Then I'd have the next 28 days to correct everything I had found. Remove the paint, repair the corrosion, and reapply new paint. I might find 30 to 50 areas that needed work, and every time I did the inspection, you'd learn a pattern where it would be more likely to show up based on how the air flowed through the open door at the front I gotta learn how to read. You'd learn the pattern of where it would be more likely to show up based on how the air flowed through the open door at the front and out the back door, for example. But there was usually a new place you'd never seen it before, too. It was a constant effort. You'd work in 5 minutes here and there as you had time to do the repairs. Question 14. How did the squadron return to peacetime operations after Desert Storm? Once we returned home on Guam, we flew almost all of our gear in the helicopters from ship to shore, starting at first light and when the ship was within range. There were only a few pieces of gear we had to wait and crane onto trucks once the ship returned to port. The crew was the last to fly off the ship, and we'd always have a big homecoming at the squadron hangar. The next week was spent returning all of our spare parts and support equipment, and the squadron would inspect our helos back before accepting them. From there, the detachment was disbanded and we'd return to our normal work centers. The squadron was made up of 12 aircraft and around 300 people. Each detachment would take 2 helicopters, 6 pilots, and a mix of different work centers, administrative people, and so on. The detachment would be about 30 people in all. Question 15. What was your next assignment after HC5? After Desert Storm, I had to decide if I wanted to stay in the Navy or get out. I requested duty in California and to a fighter jet squadron, and got orders to VF-124 F-14s in Miramar, California. VF-124 was an FRS, or Fleet Replacement Squadron. Its primary mission was to train new Navy flight crews, pilot and radar intercept officer, or RIO. In the F-14 Tomcat, I was there from 1991 to 1994, and the F-14 is what was flown in the movie Top Gun. Also at Miramar. Just the next hangar to VF-124 at the time. There actually is a Top Gun hangar. Yeah, now you know. One thing that was interesting on that transfer, though, was because of Desert Storm and also because I was based on Guam, I had not had much opportunity to take my leave time or vacation. Normally, you would get paid 30 days vacation per year, and you are not allowed to save more than 60 days total. Being deployed to Guam and then Desert Storm, I ended up having something over 100 days on the books. So as part of my transfer, I was allowed to sell back some vacation time at the same rate of pay. So I think I sold 30 days, got paid for that, took over a month of vacation, and still had quite a bit available for later. Selling the vacation time back gave me more cash to actually take the vacation. So I flew into San Francisco from Guam, bought a pickup, drove up to see my parents, and then drove down to Miramar again. It was nice to be able to just jump in and drive for a few weeks, no ship. Guam is only 30 miles long, and the ship was only 500 feet. Guam was only 30 miles long, and the ship was only 500 feet long. So I really enjoyed driving a few thousand miles, just to kind of get out and stretch your legs, I guess. 16. When did you retire from the Navy? I didn't retire. So I left the Navy in 1994 after 9 years. I would have had to stay for 20 years total to earn a retirement. At the time, I was looking for a new life, and the military was going through a reduction in forces, so it seemed like a good time to move on. Number 17. What was the most... Okay, this is the last question. Hey, we're getting there. Hey, if you stayed this long, thanks. What was the most important thing or experience you learned in the Navy? There were so many things I learned in my 9 years in the Navy, at first it seems hard to think what the most important thing might be. I was part of an incredible team. I learned to trust the people I worked with my very life. At any time, the person next to me might be in a position to save my life. Working around aircraft is dangerous. Things can happen very fast. One important thing I learned that I still use almost daily is troubleshooting as a process and understanding how things work. It's a process, like a scientific method, I suppose. From the beginning of training for aircraft maintenance schools, there is theory of operation. How does this thing work? This system work? If you understood how it is supposed to work, then you can start to identify why it doesn't work. The technical manuals were broken down into theory of operation, troubleshooting, then maintenance instruction manuals, and finally there was an illustrated parts breakdown, so you could identify the part to order a replacement. It was very detailed, logical, and organized. So to transfer that to daily life, I always look at problems from the same point of view. How should this work? Why doesn't it work? How can I fix it? Do I need to replace something? Or is this something I can't fix at all? There is a phrase I learned more recently: not my circus, not my monkeys. In some ways, it's been very difficult to adjust from military life to civilian life. On a ship or in a squadron, everyone you are in contact with in your day-to-day life is on the same team, working towards a common goal or mission: national defense. Everything else is secondary. I was only 18 when I joined the Navy, so right out of high school, I went from living with my parents to boot camp. I hadn't experienced very much of how the real world worked, I guess. In the Navy, many of the decisions have been made for you. You have a uniform. You shave every day. You have a job. You know how much you will be paid. You know the rules. Everything is very organized. As long as you do what is expected of you, it's very orderly and life is good. In the civilian world, everyone seems to have different priorities. A job is not guaranteed. Your supervisor, your customer, and your friends are not all on the same mission. Your job may cut hours, or the company may decide they don't need you at all. Finding an affordable place to live, keeping gas in the car and food on the table is more of a challenge. It seems more of life is taken up with what I would have considered petty things when I was in the military. But I think the most important thing for me personally was learning to understand myself. What do I feel was important? I realized I like my own freedom to do what I really enjoy and do it in my own way. I found that I really value my own space, doing things on my own, my individuality, and my creative energy. I realized I can go off on my own, do things that don't fit in the normal way, and it will be okay. Since leaving the Navy, I've worked in a wide range of jobs and careers. I've done well in some and not so in others. I've had the freedom to pick up and move to a new job, a new city, new states, and have lived in both Canada and the US. I don't feel trapped to live in a place or work at a job that doesn't suit me. And I think that is a pretty good way to look at life. And do I want to read this? Not really. Anyway, this interview was based on questions from the book Desert Storm Diaries, which I'll put a link in the description. That's available on Amazon. If you're interested, it'd be really great if you go check that out. It's less than $20, and if you're with Amazon Prime, it's free shipping. I think it's $14 or $17 now. I honestly don't remember. I should look that up, but I don't have internet out here at home. Yeah, how about that? Yeah, so also in the link in the description, I'll have a link back to my website. There's also a website, carlinbooks.com, carlinbooks.com, where I've got this book and a couple others listed. And obviously, if you're watching this video, you found me on YouTube. So it'd be awesome if you are interested in following my journey. Go ahead and click on subscribe. Most of the videos are about my off-grid living here. I've got a little 2040. I've got a little ranch I live on. Actually, parts of the ranch are for sale if anybody's interested. I'll put a link to that. I'm selling a couple parcels off on eBay still. Those are available. If you'd like to help support my journey out here, I've got a Patreon account. You can check that out. Donations always welcome. And yeah, all that good stuff. All right, well, with that, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one. Bye for now.